Rudy with Alpha Investments. There's a funny thing about trying to predict the future, even with Magic and Wall Street. It can't be done. So today we're going to revisit one of my favorite all-time Magic the Gathering cards in the history of Magic the Gathering. And one of the things that put me on the map about a year or so ago, or 2 years ago now, was, of course, the infamous Bazaar of Baghdad. Baghdad? The Bazaar of Baghdad situation with the card. One of my favorite cards. For the longest time, and even to this day, I still thought it was ridiculously cheap and undervalued. So I started getting some comments, some interesting information on a deal I was trying to deal and negotiate with, and all of a sudden I was getting like emails about the price spikes and the jumps and if I was involved or what was going on. Apparently, there was a rule change with the Mulligan rule, what they call the London Mulligan rule in the last 30, 60 days, and apparently this caused a huge bump up in the availability of Bazaar of Baghdad Arabian Nights cards, which is a U2, which technically means it's a rare. This is a textbook great story of why no matter how good you think you are trying to flip standard, legacy, modern, vintage, reserveless, any cards, you cannot predict the future, everybody. It's physically impossible. And now here's the dangerous thing. People say, well, Rudy, I speculated on this card. It worked. I doubled my money. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to keep rolling it over. Because what happens is, as human beings, we all look for patterns. We analyze things. We have a passion for things. We keep looking through numbers and data and all kind of charts and tables. And we will find, if we have to, we'll make our own pattern in our head, where charts or trends will start to look familiar or look like they've repeated themselves, or track records or averages. And we tend to create our own set of kind of conclusions and data points that reinforce our point of view. This happens a lot on Wall Street with technical traders and stock traders. I dealt with it a lot when I had a real job and I left my parents' basement for 2.5 days. And honestly, one of the biggest things I learned, it's almost a moral hazard, dangerous thing when somebody gets lucky. And I hate using the word luck. I know luck and guarantee, certain words are such taboo words. But the problem is when somebody flips a stock, flips a Magic card and buys $105 cards and sells them all for $8. They get empowered. They feel like they understand the market. They feel more confident, and it gives them almost justification. I think I just ate a bug. Yep, I don't know. It gives them justification for taking on more risk. It makes them more dangerous and riskier because they have a false sense of security and they think they're overly confident in their skill set. And this happened all the time. And I used to hate it, hearing stories where people say, Rudy, I figured out the pattern. I know what to do, and now I'm going to go in bigger. Because this type of confidence and type of risk management leads to bankruptcy. It takes down empires. Because you over-leverage and you're overconfident and you're blindsided. You put on blinders to the outside risks and variables that can happen to you. And I've been guilty of this many times in the past. I've lost a lot of money. I've failed many times in my life. I'm not going to tell you guys I've ever been pro. I have failed probably more times than I've been right. The difference is I keep going, and some of the things I've been right on, I've been right larger to offset the losses. So Bazaar Baghdad brings us back to this today. Obviously, a long time ago, I started buying this particular card, around $400 or $500 a card, and I started buying the raw ones all the way up to probably $700, $800, $900 raw for the nice minty ones. I'm not even going to talk about graded ones, just the raw ones. And now, when this out of nowhere, a London Mulligan rule, the Mulligan rule changes and causes a huge reduction of supply on the open market of one of my favorite cards. This is a perfect example of how predicting the future is physically impossible. There's no way I knew that was coming. There's no way any of us could have predicted a rule change in the 26 years of Magic's history, and all of a sudden certain cards spike in value. Do you see my point? There are certain outside variables and things that are always going to happen that you cannot control that are going to have a positive or a negative impact on your investment, on your collection, or even if you're playing Magic, or if maybe one of your top tier decks that you're going to go into modern or standard, and a card gets banned or restricted. You see my point? You can kind of like, well, it's at risk because it's too powerful. But at the end of the day, you don't know. There's no way to fully predict the future. And this is a great textbook example of a positive prediction, a positive thing that could not have been predicted. God, it's a tongue twister. But it doesn't make me feel more empowered, or like, hey, I told everybody to buy Bazaar Baghdad originally, and then it got pushed up in price, and then it came back down and settled. And now it's like, golly, there's barely any for sale in the open market compared to the way it was 60 days ago. And you have these tug of wars between both sides. But again, the purpose of this video is to show and discuss with you guys that, no matter how much effort you put into trying to invest and predict things, outside variables will always derail and just kind of throw a monkey wrench in everything. In the scenario of Bazaar Baghdad, it put upward pressure on the price. Period. I personally still think, the card is undervalued. But again, I'm also one of the heaviest holders of that particular card, holding a very large position in that card between raw and graded cards. I have a bunch of BGS graded, a bunch of PSA graded, and a bunch of raw all across the board because I just love the card. It's so unique. There's no casting cost because it's a basic land. It doesn't come into play tapped. I just think it's an epic card. And that's just my personal opinion. Same thing with good old Library of Alexandria and many other old cards from Arabian Nights. But the thing is, just because I feel that way, things are still going to come along and knock the value down and knock the value up. And like I tell you guys all the time, I see this in Wall Street too when people try to flip penny stocks or trade regular companies. I've talked about this in some of my other videos. You really cannot predict how this is going to work. Like I said, even a couple years ago, collector's edition, ice cards, collector's edition, gold border, these pointy, nice little square corners. They were out of favor for the longest time. In the last 36 months, they've all become worth something. Again, if you had told anybody in the last 20 years of Magic that collector's edition cards were going to be worth a lot, people would have laughed at you. And then all of a sudden, the last 36 months, all of a sudden, the whole market behavior changed. And this happens with a lot of categories of Magic. Sealed boxes, another great example. Look, Dragon's Maze boxes are actually selling. Fallen Empire booster boxes are $200, $300, $400 a box, and local stores sell them all the time. Loose packs, they sell all the time. It sells very easily. And it's just one of those things where everyone goes, really? I remember Fallen Empire boxes 20 years ago on clearance for like $10 and $20 a booster box, and nobody wanted them. Yeah, I was too young for that. I didn't have any money, but I did remember hearing about that. I first started buying Fallen Empire boxes when they were $50 a piece, which was about 10 years ago maybe. But that just shows, again, in a certain context, things may feel a certain way and make you become confident in the direction of the investment, either whether it's up or down. But as time goes on and the landscape changes, it throws everything out the window. Everything. And you have to be very careful at trying to figure things out based on the current data. Because there are going to be new data points that are going to come along, like the Bazaar Baghdad situation the last 30, 60 days, that are going to disrupt everything. This was a mulligan rule. This is just, to me, I'm just like, really? But that just shows just the fact the mulligan rule was changed. So in tournaments, if you mulligan and you draw again, you still draw the 7 and you remove. They change just how the mechanic worked. It's something that's just very minuscule to the average person, but can really make a big difference. So that's the biggest thing I wanted to touch on in this video. And this applies to booster boxes, the reserve list cards, even new standard cards. But standard cards, the biggest risk with standard cards is the fact that more supply keeps entering the market and it puts downward pressure on the cards until it goes out of rotation. And of course, when it leaves rotation, that vacuum sucks the value out and goes in the next standard set. And then, of course, eventually, everything's suppressed and nobody wants it because it's not standard legal. And then, usually a year or two later, what happens? Then the cards become rare. There's no more sealed boxes being cracked. The sealed product goes up in value due to lack of supply. The sealed price increasing constrains any more supply entering the market. And you have the same old domino falling process, which always creates value long term. And again, like I mentioned in one of my other videos, I'm not sure if it's live or not, but everything is relative. I'm really pushing this relativity thing because everything is, and people have short attention spans. Everybody is negative on something at once and the bandwagon flows there. And then the market changes their tone and all of a sudden everybody wants the same thing. And just like that, overnight, instantly, on the smallest announcement, everything can change. And you must have an open mind for long-term things to really make a lot of wealth when it comes to Magic and when it comes to even stocks, bonds, and real estate. You gotta be careful with all this crap. I'm done rambling.